Yes. So good evening once again, everybody, and welcome to our TSI online event for the month of November. Yeah, and we've titled it Help for the Homeless and Those with No Immigration, status. Now, today's event is in a way a continuation of the last one we had in October, which we titled Pathway to Housing, and we got a lot of feedback about the program, how useful it was, and we decided this time to actually narrow it down to the acute end of the market, where you have people who are homeless and people who then do not have the right immigration status. Now, I'm sure people often wonder why we do these events, why we do things like this, and it's because of what we stand for as a church. But before we continue, I just noticed I've not introduced myself and my co-pilot tonight, so we might as well do that before we go any further. So I'm Pastor Vincent Lawal of Transformation Sanctuary International, and as my co-pilot tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Victoria Lawal. Like you said, it's we are both pastors as International Transformation Sanctuary International. As Pastor Vincent said, he said I'm his co-pilot. So it's going to be a wonderful time. There's going to be a lot of information. So please, you might need to get your notepad, your writing, your pen, and because there's going to be a lot of information that you need to take on or that you need to share with other people. But the good news is this video is going to be on our Facebook page, and it's also going to be on our YouTube channel. But please tighten your seatbelt. It's going to be a long haul flight, but be ready for that. I'll hand you over.
Thank you. So why do we organize events like this? In TSI, we're built on two key pillars. One is Christ-likeness, and the other one is victorious living. With a Christ-likeness, we meet on Sundays, we meet on Thursday Bible studies, and if you've not been to one of those, it's one of the, you'll be blessed if you come to our Bible study sessions. And everything we learn there makes us more and more like Jesus on a day-to-day basis. So that's one arm. The second arm, which is victorious living, is where we empower Christians to take the right actions so they can live fulfilled lives on earth. And we have a mandate to do that. So it's not just teaching about scriptures, but it's also applying practical wisdom in our everyday living. That's what we're built on. And that's, I think this is about the 6th event this year, is it? Thereabouts?
That is the 6th event.
Yeah, thereabouts. We've covered financials, we've covered employment, we've covered health, we've covered housing, now we're talking about homelessness, and all that. So that's what we're called to do, and that's why we focus on doing things like this. Now, tonight, like my co-pilot has said, it's really going to be informative. We have lots of things to share. And please stay with us all the way and take down notes, because it might either help you or it might help someone else. Now, for tonight, it even gets better.
Yeah.
Why? Because we've got two seasoned consultants in the field of homelessness and helping people who can't help themselves. And we've got that. These are two lovely colleagues who are close to us, who we really get on well with, who we've been together in this field for quite a while now, and they are with us tonight to share and to their perspective to some of the things we're going to be discussing tonight. So we're going to ask them to introduce themselves, and of course, as I always says, ladies first.
Yeah.
In matters like this. So I'll call on our first co-speaker and co-presenter tonight to introduce herself to us. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Pastor Vincent. Thank you, Pastor Vicky. So my name is Larissa Johnson, and I work in the charity sector now, but I've been in homelessness for many years, as Pastor Vincent alluded to, having worked within mainly local authorities, but last year I took the step now to join the charity sector, focusing on homelessness. So it's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon, this evening, and yeah, I look forward to what's to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. And we've got our seasoned another co-speaker online who is going to talk more about what the local authorities do, how the local authorities support people who are in this category. And we will ask him to introduce himself as well.
Thank you, Pastor Vicky. Thank you, Pastor Vincent. My name is Abim Mabadej. I am a homelessness professional. I have worked within local authorities for decades. And I remain with local authorities. I haven't veered off like my colleague. I'm ever faithful.
Thanks for that, Abim. I was going to say yes. In my mind, I was going to say, yeah, I remain faithful also. I've not veered off, but then I remembered I took a detour to central government for 3 years and then just returned myself. So I can't say that. You've not been faithful to local authorities too, have you?
Let's just say we'll leave that for another
event.
Yes.
That makes perfect sense. So, maybe it looks like you're on your own on this one, but we won't say more than that. Okay. So let's get going then tonight. And I guess the first thing we want to start with. So the title says.
Sorry, before we go on, if you have any questions, like we always say,
yes,
put it on the chat,
please.
Put it on the comments on Facebook, and we will take that as we go along. And the ones we can take in between the slides or the presentations, we will take that at the end of the session. But please ask as many questions as possible. Remember, you are not paying for this, right? We are not solicitors. We are not saying go to a particular person to go and get information and then you will have to pay. So this is information that will be useful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like I said, it may not be for you. It may be for someone you know or someone that knows someone you know.
Yeah.
So please put your questions and we'll gladly answer those questions.
Yeah, and you don't have to answer the question like Pastor Victoria just said, because you have an immigration issue. You might have heard of something and we're not clear about it. Put it in the chat and we'll try to answer the question. Okay, let's hit the ground running then. What does it mean then? So the title is help for people who are homeless and with no immigration status. It just makes sense then for us to start with definition of terms. What does it mean to be homeless? Because what I found out is because there's so much legality around these issues, because there's so much legality around it, you then find out that the legal definition might be slightly different from our everyday English language. Anyways, so let's start off there. What does it mean to be homeless? Abim, would you want to help us with that, please?
Yes, so there is a legal definition of homelessness, and there is, of course, there are other definitions as people may want to define them. But as far as this is concerned, the legal definition says that somebody who has no home in the UK or anywhere else in the world available and reasonable to occupy. Of course, what exactly does that mean to you and I? It can mean a whole lot of things to people. What exactly does it mean? Though, as far as the UK is concerned, when we talk about accommodation and somebody being homeless, we're talking about somebody without a roof over their heads. So somebody who you would normally see as sleeping out on the streets, or somebody who people would refer to as sleeping in a cardboard box. Somebody who's houseless, so you don't have a house. You might have a place to stay, but it's temporary. You might be in prison. It may be anywhere else, but somewhere where you have no security of tenure. I believe that the last time during the last session, a few things were mentioned about security of tenure. So you have no security of tenure where you're staying. And then you have somebody who lives in insecure housing. So you're threatened with severe exclusion, maybe because of insecurity of your tenancy, or perhaps the landlord has served you with notice to leave, or perhaps you're fleeing domestic violence, or it may even be that you're fleeing from violence from outside of the home, not necessarily domestic violence. You're staying with friends and family, and that's transient. So somebody could wake up tomorrow, have a dream and say, well, actually, I don't want you here anymore. I want you to go. You would, of course, be homeless because you've been staying from one place to the other. And you're living in inadequate housing. So perhaps you're living in a caravan, you're living in on a campsite, on an illegal campsite, you're living in accommodation that is unfit for human habitation. And what exactly does that mean? There are lots of disrepair issues, but you're simply just staying there because you've got nowhere else to go. Housed without heating, without hot water, without electricity, wires hanging all over the place and things like that. Or you're living in extreme overcrowding. And that, in effect, is what we mean by somebody who's homeless in a broad term. When we talk about extreme overcrowding, we're talking about people who cram themselves into a place. That may be due to natural increase, or it may be because, somebody's coming from wherever, or you found a friend who's homeless. You've asked them, okay, look, just come and stay with me. And then you found somebody else, because you've got a huge heart, you say, come and stay with me. And before you know what's happening, your accommodation becomes overcrowded or extremely overcrowded. It may be because as a result of financial, say your financial standing, you get together with a number of people to rent a place. You would still be homeless because there are too many of you staying in that particular place. There of course, is a legal definition of overcrowding and statutory overcrowding, but that's not the essence of today's session.
Okay. Wow, thank you. That's really useful. And I guess the first thing I'm picking out from that is when we talk about homelessness, we're not just talking about people on the streets, are we?
No.
About, I can see that person who's sleeping under the flyover, who has a tent, for example, on the streets. And I guess from a Christian's perspective, then, can there be homeless people right around us, in church, in our gatherings, and things like that? Is there a possibility at all?
I believe that I would say that there's actually a lot more homelessness in Christendom than in a lot of other places, because you have people who are staying with other people. Perhaps somebody's homeless. Pastor gets to know. Pastor says, "Look, can you help this person let them live with you for a while until they sort themselves out?" They are still homeless.
Right.
Because the reality is that you could wake up one morning and decide you want them out. I believe during the last session, we talked about my house, my rules. And somebody, you're just not gelling. You could decide, okay, I'm going to tell Pastor, look, this is not on. This person's got to move. That person is still homeless. Of course, within churches, there are lots of families like that. Wow. And I would say we've got a number of people who, say, in recent times, because of Brexit, have come in from around the world, the Commonwealth countries, for instance, and they've come into the UK because they've got the visa to come and work. And so the churches have put them up with families until they get themselves sorted out. Literally, they're still homeless. Financially, they may not have a problem, but the fact is that because they're staying with you, they remain homeless.
Right. Thank you. That's really useful. Thank you. Okay. Like I said, if you've got any questions, please put it in the chat, and we'll pick it up as we go along. Okay. So the second part of this, of course, is people not having recourse to public funds or not having the right immigration status. So I guess my question then to Loretta will be, what do we mean by people not having the right immigration status? Is there a wrong immigration status?
Yeah, there is those that are classed as not having the right immigration status by way of their eligibility to what you and I may be eligible for by way of public funds. And so usually we say that you are classed as a person with no recourse or a person who has who isn't eligible. Just to go through that, it's an area that can be very, very complex, and there's different categories of people that we can term as having no recourse to public funds. But just to make it really, really easy, or to make it as straightforward as possible, when we talk about people that have no recourse to public funds or people that are not eligible, it's essentially because they have immigration status that says they are restricted in being able to access either public funds by way of housing or benefits. That's the most easiest way I can kind of categorize it.
Okay.
And what that means is that for anyone that has these restrictions on their immigration status, it means that they won't be able to go to a local authority and say, I am homeless, or I'm going to become homeless, can you help me?
Right.
We do have some UK nationals who also may not be entitled to some form of benefits. And that's usually because they've been outside of the country for at least 2 years and they're returning back. And for those people, they are subject to what we say a habitual residency test.
Mm.
I think the screen that we're showing at the moment probably isn't the correct one, just so everyone can follow.
Right. A person with restrictions, okay. You want to go to, what's the next one?
What's the next one, please? Next one?
No.
Okay, right.
Right.
So,
Okay, so
go back, just, that's it, that's the one, it's fine.
yeah.
Yep, that's perfect. So it's essentially, when we talk about restrictions, as I said before, it's really about lack of ability to be able to get benefits from either a local authority or housing association. Accommodation-wise, it means you're restricted. And if you're not able to also work, you're likely to then be on the street. So the impact means that, you know, you are destitute as a person who has those restrictions placed upon you. And there's also a category of people who are not able to even rent, even if they're able to work, they can't rent because they're subject to what we call right to rent checks.
Right.
And so all of this is leading to a person in this country, you know, what we might call a first world country, not able to work, not able to claim benefits, not able to have a roof over their head. They're going to be destitute on the street.
Wow.
So that's the impact that is likely to be a result of someone not having that immigration status, that right immigration status, I think you referred to there, Pastor.
Right, okay.
right. So the question for me, and thank you, Loretta for mentioning that, is that even UK nationals, if they've been out of the country for a certain period of time, when they come back, they may not have the right to public funds. Could you please explain more on that?
Yeah. So as I said, this area can get quite complicated. But essentially, you could have a British passport or have the right to remain in this country or to stay in this country by way of your immigration status. But if you are not able to show that this is your common place of residency because you've established roots elsewhere, maybe, you know, there used to be a lot of people that used to go to Spain before Brexit, before Brexit and also before the pandemic. They will go over to Spain, they will establish a business, they will have, you know, sort of an immediate family come join them, they'll have accommodation, and they will live there for a period of time and say that is their home. Mm-hmm. Something may happen in between the time that they're there. Maybe their health deteriorates or they lose their business and they want to return back to this country. if they're not able to prove that this is their common place of residence, they won't, for a period of time, be able to access public funds.
Right. Okay. Wow.
And honestly, thank you for shedding light on that. I think just a digression, really. I guess one of my friends wanted to take her child out of the country to another country to study, and she was advised that if the child stays out of the country for a certain number of for a certain period of time, a few years, by the time she comes back to study here, she will have to pay international fees.
Wow.
And I guess this is the same thing that is, it's not just when we have to take a decision or do something to go outside our permanent place of residence for some time. I think it's just right to
find out, to be clear, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes, some things are, maybe it might be a fad, or I'm sending my child to Canada, I'm sending my child to the US to go study and all that. You've got to be careful, because in coming back, it might have repercussions which you didn't plan for. So that's why it's important that we get the right information. We make sure we have all the facts. I think my wife has used the word due diligence probably 10 times this week. Everything's due diligence.
Absolutely.
Do your due diligence before you go to bed. I'm like, what does that even mean? So but with this one, you need to do your due diligence, which means gather your information, know what's available, know the impact your actions will have before you take that step. Okay.
All right. So it's come to me now. Somebody, a good friend of ours called me the number cruncher.
The number cruncher.
So now it's time for numbers, all right? Because it's always good to put whatever we're sharing, to put it in context.
Yes.
And I will just be sharing briefly on some of the statistics of homelessness in the UK. And when I mean the UK, it involves both England, Wales. If it's particularly about England, then I will say England or Scotland or Wales. But this is just some of the information on in UK. So I guess for me is the first thing is it did say that according to Shelter is one of the UK national charities, that about 269 approximately households were at risk of homelessness between 2020 and 2021. Wow. And Abim did mention it, that homelessness is not just not having a roof over your head. They may be staying with family, they may be staying with church members, but everyone in that category is about 268 560 households that experienced some of them form of homelessness in 2020, 2021. But I guess there was a decrease from the previous year because it was a year that COVID was out rampant, and the government initiated a few schemes to house some of the homeless people.
Correct.
Between July and September, we had about approximately 69,000 people approach the council for support, especially following the COVID-19 lockdown, with a further 94,000 approximately households were living in temporary accommodation. I have a picture there which shows, some of the we've been out, because as a church we go out to feed homeless people, and actually when I saw this picture it was a familiar thing, because you find out that people are living in tents, they're living in what do they call this?
Tents,
they're called tents, isn't it? And sometimes they live in come together like a colony. But sometimes you find them in different places. The London Combined Homelessness Information, which is called the chain, showed that about 11,000 people were seen sleeping rough. When I mean sleeping rough, they were actually sleeping outside on the streets. Yes. Between April and March 2021, last year, April and March 2021, which means there's an increase of about 10,726 people from the previous year. It just shows you that, some of us, we go out, we come back home, we stay under a duvet, and there are people out there who are sleeping on the street. And that figure actually shows that rough sleeping has increased by 94% in the last decade. So in the last 10 years, rough sleeping has actually increased by 10%. Did I say 94%? Sorry. Nearly half of the people sleeping rough in a single night in autumn are from London and the Southeast.
Wow.
So it means that most people who are sleeping rough are concentrated around London area and around Southeast.
So that nearly half of everyone sleeping rough in the UK are in London.
In London and the Southeast. Yes, right. That's what it means. And from statistics as well, most of the people sleeping rough in England are male that are over 26 years of age.
So why is that though? Why are there more men sleeping on the streets? Why are there more men? And I'm sure you'd agree with me that when you walk around, we do see some females on the street too, but it's predominantly men. I don't know if anyone has any views on that, on why it's usually men we find sleeping on the streets, and those aged over 26 years old too.
I think I'm sure probably Loretta or Abim will have probably
no, anybody in
more
the
information
audience,
or people in the audience. But I guess sometimes when there's a relationship breakdown, like for example, there was one that happened recently, and it happens many times when there's a relationship breakdown and the woman has a dependent children. Usually, once that relationship is broken down and the law enforcement have to come in, most of the time the man has to leave the home,
right?
Isn't it? So, especially in a situation where domestic violence has been established and all of that. So I guess that's one of the maybe one of.
Would there be any other reason, Abim, Loretta, anyone in the audience, any other reason why there are more men on the street? I think in a way it's a good thing that there are more men. Right? We don't want anybody on the streets, but if anybody will be on the street, I'd rather we have men than women, because seeing a woman on the streets is just, I think for me, it's just really, really sad. So I don't know. You can put your thoughts in the comments, please. In the chats, if you have any idea why there are more men on the streets than women. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Abim, Loretta, do you want to say something on that before we go on?
Well, I was also going to say in some cases, it's regardless of the fact that there is domestic violence in the home or law enforcement have been involved. In some cases, the man simply just decides, look, I'm going to have to leave. Okay, so that we don't end up hurting each other.
Yeah.
So in some cases, it's the voluntary situation. There is also, I think, the fact that a lot more men tend to have alcoholism and so end up on the streets. A lot of them tend to also get involved with drugs and end up on the streets. So you've got a combination of all those. When we talk about young people ending up on the streets, family relationship breakdowns, parents are more likely to exclude a young man than they are a young woman, because it's a lot easier for the young man to sort himself out on the streets than for a young woman who might be exploited or worse.
Right. Okay.
I guess, Vincent, can I ask though? Okay, go on, please.
No, I was just going to add to what Abim just said in regards to the gender. I'm not quite sure that you could always say just because there's more men that may be suffering from addiction, that they may be the ones that end up on the street more. But I think often another root cause of homelessness is as a result of maybe an institution release. So someone that has gone to prison and they've come out, and you usually find that there's more men in those institutions. You also find that people that have gone to the armed forces tend to be, predominantly men. I know the trend is changing, and that particular group, due to maybe trauma that they've suffered or other kind of reasons, not having accommodation tends to go hand in hand. Sometimes they do have accommodation, but because of maybe underlying mental health issues, both diagnosed and undiagnosed, they can't stay in the family home. And so, for them, the only option is to kind of, wander around or be on the streets. So I think that's probably why the gender kind of association is there.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for that. On the chat, we've got family circumstances. Again, I think we've said a fair few a bit about that already, like divorce, domestic violence. That's correct. Thanks for that, Jenke. Women are more likely to seek help. Men may choose not to. I'll sort myself. I'll help myself. I don't need anyone helping me. It just makes things worse and all that. So yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah.
But before I go on, I want to ask a question, and these are to the experts, either the charity or local authority. Is it that the government supports more women than men? Because if a woman approaches the council and say, "Oh, I'm pregnant, I need a place to stay," but a man cannot just say, "Oh, I'm homeless, would you rehouse me?" Would that be part of the reasons why more men are on the streets as well?
I think that's Abim's bread and butter. So Abim,
well, when a woman when someone approaches the local authority and says I'm homeless, of course one of the things we look at is whether or not the person has a medical issue and how serious that medical issue may be. Or of course, if it's a woman, we ask the question, are you pregnant? You might find that because there's a script, somebody might ask a man because they were not really thinking about whether or not they're following a script and who's sitting in front of them. But ordinarily, if a woman is pregnant, automatically, they would be seen as vulnerable in the eyes of the law. And so the local authority would have a duty to pick them up. But a man would still have to go through, and of course, and a single woman will still have to go through the test of vulnerability. What's your age? Have you got any mental health issues? But it's not just about you having a mental health issue or a physical health issue. It's about whether those issues make you vulnerable. And there's a complex definition of vulnerability when it comes to homelessness. It's not just about you having these health issues. So you have somebody who's got diabetes, for instance. Somebody who's got diabetes may have a priority need. Another person who's got diabetes may not have a priority need. The difference is, what type of diabetes do you have? If you've got diabetes type 1, which means you take an insulin and you need a fridge to put your insulin in, automatically you would be vulnerable without any referral to a doctor. But if you've got diabetes type 2, you're more likely not going to be vulnerable because you're simply taking tablets that you can always keep with you at any given point.
Right.
So there are those issues there, which of course mean that, yes, more women may be picked up by the local authority than men.
Right. Wow. Thank you for that. I guess my advice to all of us on this call is, if you know any young man who at the moment is like, I'm going to do my own thing, I'm not listening to my parents or things like that, please advise them. It's more difficult for a young man to get assistance from, at least from statutory bodies, than other people. So they've got to think through their decisions before they take action. Else they might find themselves in a position they don't want. Okay.
All right, thank you, sir. I'm just going to quickly run through the remaining slides.
Yeah.
And this is just to show an estimate of people sleeping rough between 2017 and 2020. And you could see that there are more people that are over 26 than the other age group.
Okay.
I think I've mentioned this, that people sleeping in rough sleeping in a particular night, it shows that there are more UK nationals. So it says most people sleeping rough on a single night in autumn were from the UK. That's UK nationals, right? And so from that 2668 that we mentioned, 1,900 of them are from the UK nationals, while the remaining are either from EU and some people from other other ethnic background. So it's just to let you know that it's not just people who have migrated that are sleeping rough. A lot of UK nationals are sleeping rough. And really this next slide is just showing the number of people by ethnicity as well.
So I guess the summary on that is homelessness affects just about anybody.
Everybody.
So, you know, a lot of times we look at this and like, oh yeah, if you don't have papers, you are likely to become homeless. That's true. But there are lots of people in the country who have the right immigration status, who are British nationals, and yet they are still experiencing homelessness. And again, if we take it back to the church sector, to the charity sector, there are people in our midst who have the right documents and yet are struggling. And they're struggling with their housing. And we shouldn't just close our eyes at, oh, because they're not from Europe, they're fine. Or because they've got the right papers, they're fine. We still need to ask the right questions so we know who we need to assist. Yeah.
The good news is, I guess on the next slide, is that government has a lot of schemes now. So in November 2020, government helped about 33,000 people and moved them to supported them into temporary emergency accommodation, and about 23,000 people are moved into longer term accommodation. So government is really pumping money into that sector to see that people are rehoused. And that next slide just shows how much has been spent on homelessness and rough sleeping, about 750 million in 2021. Okay. And also the Scottish government is doing same as well. But I'll just mention this, and this is my last slide. It says at the end of March 2021, 68 councils provided 3,200 households with no recourse to public funds. So before it used to be, okay, if you don't have recourse to public funds, we cannot help you. But now, you know, people are being held and there's just help out there. We just need to start asking the right questions and going to the right places. So
thank you.
Hand over back to Vincent.
Okay, so we talked about this in a bit, and this is around the root cause of homelessness, because again, the key issue is not ruthlessness. For someone who's worked in the sector for 20 odd years now, the key issue often is not being able to afford to pay for a home. So as our last session, we talked about pathway to housing from squatter to landlord. The only reason why you're a landlord is because you can afford, you know, to buy a property, not only buy a property, but buy another one where you then put people in, where you've got tenants. But with homelessness, oftentimes the root causes go deeper than I just don't have a place to stay. And some of the issues then will be, and we've mentioned them already, relationship breakdown, domestic violence, loss of job, for example. People could be doing well and then they lose their jobs. And suddenly, if you don't get a job within a period of 3 months, you are faced with street homelessness. Especially in a society where we max out our credit cards and we're living on the brink, no savings whatsoever, living on the brink, no investment, and something happens, no money in 2 months, and you're out on the streets. You mentioned illiteracy, because maybe there's some people we call NEET, not because they're neat in how they look, NEET, N-E-E-T, not in education, employment, or training. They're UK nationals usually. If anyone falls into that category, something goes wrong at home, they become homeless. Abuse and harassment, illegal eviction. Sometimes you have a dodgy landlord who just comes in one day, throws your things out and locks the door and disappears into thin air, or brings in somebody, puts someone into your property. You go to the local authority, they're like, oh, we reinstate you in. They get there, somebody else is already living there. They can't evict that person, you're in trouble. Mental health is another key reason why, you know, these are some of the root causes of homelessness. Okay, moving on because of time then. So, Abim, I guess this is for you then. What help, what impact does homelessness have on people's well-being, mental health, and future prospects? I guess this question is actually for all of us, isn't it? What impact does homelessness have on people's well-being, mental health, and future prospects? Is it just about, oh, I need a roof, find a roof, you're fine? Yeah. Anyone want to start us up on that?
I guess, okay. Sorry, I'll start us off, and then we'll go to the next one, which is what help does the council provide? I guess the impact, of course, it's just it's all encompassing. It's not just physical. You see people who are physical here, they're homeless, especially the ones that are roofless, right, or houseless. Is it? I'm learning new things tonight. I only thought that homelessness is just you are not under a roof. But when people are roofless and they are houseless, we've seen some of them when we go out, to reach out to some of these people, and you find out that they've not had their bath for quite a while. They don't have change of clothes, and which leads in a way to mental health. You can imagine people sleeping rough on the street. Once you see them, you recognize them that they've been out for a while. So physical health leads to mental health, and of course, drug. Even if they start out as I'm not going to be involved in all of this. But once they're out there, to keep warm outside, they might be introduced to alcoholism, drugs, and all of that. And I guess all of that has
we've had cases where people are kicked where they're sleeping. That some drunk person will just walk up to them and just kick them. So abuse, physical abuse, being beaten up for no reason. People steal their things, and all the other desperate homeless people steal from them because they need money to fund their own lifestyle, their addiction. And even when we go away from street homelessness and look at people who stay with other people, so pastor says, can you please keep this person? What's that word? Treading with on eggshells. You've got to be careful. It's not your family home. You've got to be careful what you say, what you don't say. You put on the heating. Your landlord is angry. The person you're staying with is angry. Things like that. Because you don't want to be back out. Just the sheer stress of not being able to relax. You stay in your room because you don't want to get in the way.
But Vincent, you're talking about this as if it's hypothetical. We've had our own share of it. When we were surfing in somebody's living room, this was years ago. And you have to, because it's the person's living room, you have to keep it tidy. And that person will bring their friends over. And even if their friends stay till 12 p.m., 1 p.m., you still at 1 a.m. in the morning. You will still be awake waiting for them to go because you're so suffering. So and it's so real that like you said, when you tread on eggshells, you have to be careful. You don't know what to say, you don't know where to step, and it can be really, really a daunting experience.
It can be definitely, it can be. So why are we saying all of this? If you see somebody either on the streets or not, just know what you see is the tip of the iceberg. What you're seeing about their situation is just the littlest bit, which is showing up above the surface. There's a bigger, wider issue around being homeless, and it's not just about accommodation, being in accommodation. So what helps then? What help then does councils provide to those who are homeless? Abin? What help is out there? If someone is homeless, and let's assume they have the right immigration status, indefinite leave to remain, or whatever, and they're like, okay, I can't stay here anymore, or they've just received their documents, immigration documents, what help can councils provide to people? Abin?
My apologies, I forgot to unmute myself.
Right.
So local authorities deal with homelessness based on what the law says. And so if somebody if they've got their immigration papers intact, or they don't have any immigration issues, and there's no restriction on public funding, then the law is quite clear. If you're homeless and you're eligible, the local and you have, or the local authority believes that you may have a priority need, the local authority has a duty to provide you with interim accommodation. A lot of times, people will not get interim accommodation, not because of anything other than the fact that local authority looks at its budgets and decides to interpret legislation very, very finely. So when the legislation says, if the local authority has a reason to believe that you're homeless, you're eligible, and you may have a priority need, they have a duty to provide you with interim accommodation. The local authority knows it has a duty, which means it can't get out of it. So they will make a decision that actually, we don't have a reason to believe that you may be vulnerable. It's a low threshold, but of course, even though it's a low threshold, the argument could be, well, so many single people come to us and we cannot have a reason to believe that all of them are vulnerable. But then if you're holding a child with you, they might still want to say, well, stay with a friend. So, but if you're homeless, it's simply, I cannot go to my friend's place. You have a duty to provide the accommodation, and they don't have a choice but to do that. But sometimes, like I said, local authorities tend to try and get away from it. Local authorities, if they've accepted a duty towards you, that's a final duty towards you, they have a duty to provide you with temporary accommodation. Now, you may ask, what's the difference between interim accommodation and temporary accommodation? The difference is that, and unfortunately, again, it's defined by law, although both of them are temporary. But interim is when the local authority is still working on your case. Once they finish with your case and they decide, we now have a duty towards you, that's interim accommodation that they've put you in becomes temporary accommodation until they can then discharge their duty by providing you with something much more long-term.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So now, where can they provide you with accommodation? I'm talking about the type of accommodation they can provide. It could be a hostel. So the local authority runs a number of hostels. They might be working with some charities who provide some hostels. So it could be a hostel, it could be bed and breakfast accommodation. But if you're in bed and breakfast accommodation and you've got a child, you should not be in temporary accommodation for more than 6 weeks. That's what the law says. And central government monitors this every quarter. The local authority has to submit its data to central government. And in it asks the question, how many families were in bed and breakfast accommodation for more than 6 weeks? And so once you pull out the data, you'll be able to say, well, actually, we never did because we all kept an eye on it, or we had 1 or 2 or 3. But generally, local authorities tend not to put people with children in bed and breakfast accommodation for more than 6 weeks. It used to be the case that they could put you there for as long as, but that's no longer the case. They could provide you with accommodation in a hotel. So if you phone up a local authority late one evening because the person you're staying with decided at 10 p.m., no, you can no longer stay with me, you've got to go now. You don't have a right in their home. So if you call up the local authority, it may be that they'll find your place in the Premier Inn for a night or until the next working day, and then and until at least they can pick you up. Then it may be that they provide you with temporary accommodation, but in private rented accommodation. So the local authority has a contract with some private accommodation providers, and you might get a 1-bed flat, a 2-bed flat, depending on the size of the family. But then that's not to say that if you're a family of 5, you'll get a 3-bed or a 4-bed. It might still be a 2-bed, because as long as the local authority believes that it's suitable for you, they'll put you in there. Then council-owned accommodation. Again, as a private rented accommodation, some local authorities have put a stock aside to use for temporary accommodation because it's a lot cheaper for them than going to private providers. And in terms of location, it's dependent on your circumstances. Some local authorities would say if you're not working, we'll provide you with accommodation outside of London. But that would also depend, of course, on whether you've got children, whether you've got medical issues and you're receiving specialist treatment. If you've got children and your children are in GCSE years, for instance, they cannot be expected to travel from Manchester to London for school, and cannot be expected to change their schools. There have been a number of case laws on this specific issue. So accommodation can be within or outside of London. Right. Now, when it comes to permanent accommodation, okay, local authorities, if you make an application as a homeless person, if they have decided that they have a duty towards you, they can provide you with accommodation in private rented accommodation, or it could be a council or housing association property, or it could be supported accommodation that is owned by charities. All that depends again on what the circumstances are. But as somebody who's applying as homeless, you must have at the back of your mind that as a homeless person, the local authority no longer has a duty to provide you with a council property. So a lot of local authorities by default would look at private rented accommodation. The other is that in 2018, the law changed. The law said in 2018 that local authorities should seek to relieve your homelessness. So if you're already homeless, they will seek to relieve your homelessness, and that is likely going to be in the private rented sector. If they're not able to relieve your homelessness, they're not able to prevent it or relieve your homelessness if you become homeless, then they'll make a decision on your case, a formal decision on your case. And if they accept you, then at that point, you may go onto their housing register and work your way up into social housing, which will be a council property or a housing association property. That's not always guaranteed because, again, because temporary accommodation costs, local authorities would make you, in some cases, a director of a council property would be just a one offer, or they could find you accommodation in the private sector during that period that they will put you into. Yeah. Now, when I mention people in supported, being put in supported accommodation owned by charities, in some cases, local authorities will discharge their duty into that because maybe a single person has mental health issues. There is a charity that has supported accommodation that's suitable for them. There is an agreement that they will take you on for the next 12 months or 24 months. And when you're ready for independent living, then local authorities might be able to pick you up and place you somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, that again could be anywhere, as I said, with temporary accommodation, depending on circumstances. Most local authorities want to provide you with permanent accommodation within their borough because that's where you really have your connection. But more to the point is that it's got to be suitable. Now, suitability is also something that's been very, very contentious. And in the last 2 weeks, a court's order came through, which suggested that local authorities cannot say, oh, because St. Mungo's have always provided you with accommodation and it's always been suitable. They can simply make you an offer with St. Mungo's property or a housing association property. The local authority must have a report confirming the physical, that a physical inspection is being carried out and what has been done. Without that, it's seen as an assumption that the property is suitable. Therefore, it would not be accepted as a suitable offer. It's also, when we talk about suitability, we also have to talk about affordability. Can you reasonably afford it? And that generally goes to private rented accommodation.
Right.
Thank you, Abim, and thank you for that. That's a very comprehensive answer to that. And it just makes, so they are upstream. And if you look at tenancy, which we mentioned last week, a lot of housing, a lot of local authorities are losing their stock, their housing stock, because of right to buy and because they are not building as many social housing as before. Correct. So gone are the days where when the council has a duty towards you, they can discharge you into a council house, local authority housing. now that no longer obtains. They can discharge you. If there's a private rented sector accommodation, you can be discharged into such. Which takes us to the next one. Thank you, Abin. So Loretta, this is for you. So now we've talked about local authorities, what the councils are doing to support people. What about, what are the roles, what is the role of charity in helping homeless people, and how do the charity help in addressing the the root causes of homelessness? If we can just take all of that together briefly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Vicky. So just starting off with the role of charities, and usually charities have started from a position of faith. So it's usually a faith-based organizations, but there's also charities that have started as a result of trying to meet a social injustice that they've identified. So they've existed for many years, and usually when it comes to homelessness, they're there to try and provide things like night shelters within their church halls, soup kitchen, clothes distribution, outreach support. In my experience, I've seen churches or charities go out to reach people that are on the street at the place where they need it the most. So they're often the first responders. That's what I'll call them, the first responders, usually there at the local level to try and meet a need. Yeah. And where charities are concerned, almost different for a local authority perspective, is that usually they won't do any legal assessments. So some of the assessments that Abim has just gone through, all of that rigid, categorization of people, whether they fit into a priority need or don't, whether they've got children or, charities in the main instance would not apply those assessments and those kind of rigid process to just helping an individual, because they're just there to meet the human need. So as I said, they'll go through, things like providing food and basic sanitations like shower, pastoral care, prayers, day center, and just being a listening ear to an individual that is in a place of need. Having said that, in my experience now, just because of the position that we find charities in, a lot of them are working in conjunction, in partnership with local authorities and other partners. And because, I mean, we've seen even during COVID, partnership has formed between government, local authorities, and the charity sector like never before. And all of that rallying around just to solve a human need has meant that together they've been stronger to be able to do the work that was required, and so working in partnership, charities are kind of leaning towards that now, to help with homelessness, child poverty, debt advice. And I would say it's really a means of trying to look for long-term sustainable outcomes. So those initiatives, that means that, it's not just the short-term provision, but how do we resolve the problem long-term? You asked the question, Pastor Vicky, around why is it more men or women on the street? A charity can undertake an assessment, evidence-based assessment, to prove to the government, actually, this is the reasons why we have more men and more women, and then together inform how policy moves forward. So the role for charities is not to be kind of underestimated. They're first responders, but long-term, they could also meet, the long-term needs. So just going on then, for the next slide, looking at some of the practical things that charities can do. Charities can be there to provide COVID-safe modular accommodation. These are usually, a roof over someone's head. It doesn't need you to have bricks and mortar. It's usually easily manufactured, self-contained COVID-safe accommodation, not just for rough sleepers, but actually for anyone that is experiencing homelessness. Charities could also develop different ways of meeting the needs at the local level, taking food to people rather than people having to come to their church for food. They can create social enterprise ventures, and I've seen many charities actually have that social value within almost a business model. They set up foot patrols. So these are just some examples here that I've just listed. And also just because of time, looking at how they can provide that upstream work, that prevention work to stop people from becoming homeless, giving the housing advice, giving employment support, debt advice. I mean, Christians Against Poverty, CAP, was set up as that kind of response to a human need, but they're not just doing, the food. They're doing the equipping of individuals to help them into long-term independence. So just a point to note here that without faith group and community projects, when it comes to rough sleeping, for instance, the evidence has shown that recently rough sleeping would be at least 40% higher than what it currently is. And Pastor Vicky, you've gone through the numbers. So imagine that you increase that by 40% because of charities and community projects being set up. We're reducing that together. So that's where I'm going to leave that. Can you go to the next slide so I can just give you some names of some charities, organizations. Shelter give advice. They have caseworkers, so legal caseworkers, and they'll give advice for anyone that is either experiencing homelessness or at risk of losing their accommodation. So they are spread across that. We have shelter in many districts, many local authorities are even seeking to work with them now. So if you go online and just type in shelter, if anyone needs advice, you can link up with one of their caseworkers. There's also Crisis, and Crisis have worked with thousands of people experiencing homelessness. In fact, they continue to do so on an annual basis. They provide help and support for anyone that it may be experiencing homelessness, essentially just to rebuild their lives and to move on to some sort of independence. And the support that they provide is bespoke, depending on that individual needs. They also help, with providing advice and courses for people that are experiencing homeless, both in England, Scotland, and also in Wales. And then there's the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army have a church and also the charity responsibilities. And their work is wide ranging, both in the UK and also in the Republic of Ireland. They provide things like day centres, employment advice, debt advice, food. They're also looking at addiction development work. They provide supported accommodation, something that Abim just mentioned a moment ago. It's not just some Mongos that will do it. Salvation Army is also another organisation that provide the same. And at the front end, they also have emergency hostels and night shelters. We're reducing it, or they're reducing it somewhat as a result of COVID, but they are still providing that. Another organisation, this is particularly for those that we talked about that may have immigration issues, and the organisation NACOM, or No Accommodation Network, have been set up specifically to try and help people that may be destitute, or they want to try and prevent destitution for anyone that has been seeking asylum or is a refugee or has any sort of immigration restrictions placed upon them. That means that they have no recourse to public funds. And they're also wide ranging in terms of the support. They give accommodation, they do advice, they do they provide legal advice, as well as support to individuals that, as I said, are either seeking asylum, refugees, or have immigration status that restricts them from being able to access public funds. At the other end, so this, you would say that sort of the emergency provision, but if you go on to the next slide, there are some other organisations that I think is worthwhile mentioning today, and they provide assistance to any churches that want to try and look at that long-term sustainable solution. So Housing Justice, for instance, help churches and other faith-based organisations to take that action to address homelessness within, the local context. They set up and support night shelters. They will link people that have spare rooms. So if you and I have a spare room, social justice are working towards linking you up with a person that may be destitute, and they will give you that ongoing support. They also support churches to identify ways that they can use their assets to benefit those that are in housing need or are also homeless. and they support churches and community groups to also develop their own local responses to homelessness and housing need. And essentially, they're all about raising awareness amongst Christians about homelessness and housing needs, just taking that action, that social action, to meet the needs of anyone that may have a housing need or is experiencing homelessness. And the final two organisations that I think we need to mention is Hope in Action and Green Pastures. And both of these organisations are there to provide the bricks and mortar. So they're there to provide accommodation. They will fund the provision. They'll go and buy a house if a church identifies that they've got a homelessness issue within their locality and they don't have the money to buy a house. They will buy the house and they will work with that church to try and set up a model that means that the church folk are able to help with the support, with the mentoring, and to support the individuals into some form of independence. So just a few organisations to mention. We do have one other organisation, which is the No Recourse to Public Funds Network. And I know Abin may also have, or Pastor Vincent may have other organisations, but I thought it was worthwhile just mentioning these organisations just to start off with. And also just to say that whilst these organisations want to try and provide the support to meet the needs of individuals, essentially they also provide that lobbying. They're the voice for the human on the street, those that are on the fringes of society, they're marginalised, and so often they will lobby. They'll provide the evidence and go to central government and say, what are you doing about this? Why are you not helping this group of people? And so their work can be quite fundamental to changing policies. Shall I leave it there?
Yes, thank you. That's really useful and comprehensive. I guess what's important there is, one, there's help for people, but two, there's also help for churches. So I know we've got people on the platform attending different churches, and what's important then is, if you're not doing anything as a church yet for homeless people, these organizations you can contact. They work with churches generally, and they can then show you how you can contribute your own quota to, in terms of helping people. I'm sure we all remember Matthew 25. Jesus said, you fed me, you visited me in hospital, you did X, Y, Z for me. And they said, when did we do it for you? He said, if you've done it for one of these ones, you've done it for me. It's important that the church takes a key role in helping people who are destitute or who find themselves in this kind of situation. Now, moving on,
Pastor Vincent, can I just mention, I think someone had their hand up for quite a while. I don't know if we're taking questions by way of verbal questions.
I see that. My apologies. Who's got their hands up? Can you please ask your question? Or put it in the chat. Who's the person? Do we know? I can't see it from my end.
I think she's put it down now, but we can't. She's not unmuted. It's
OPP or something.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can you unmute the person?
OPP or find. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Sorry about
Hi, sorry, myself, but I wasn't able to. I think you more or less answered my question actually. When I was listening to you speak about the issues in social care, just a brief introduction. My name is Obi, and I consult for various health and social care providers. So I work with people that provide supported living accommodation, and I know quite a few of them that have empty houses. So I was wondering why the local authorities aren't working with these people in order to alleviate these issues. So I don't know if it's a question you're able to answer, but if you could, I'll really appreciate it. I think this question is to Abim.
Thank you. I'm not sure I got the question. I suspect you're asking why local authorities aren't working with some accommodation providers.
Yeah, and if it's possible for the local authority to work with supported living providers, because you mentioned that they would work with charity organizations that provide assisted or supported living.
Yeah.
So if I rephrase my question, is it possible for local authorities to work with private organizations that provide assisted living?
Yes, it is. It is. Local authorities are constantly looking for ways to work in partnership with people in the private sector or charities to discharge their duties and to meet needs. Generally, what would happen is that if we've got, say, an organization that deals with assisted living, okay, it might be a matter for not just the housing department, but also for adult social care, depending on the person's circumstances. Now, when we talk about adult social care, we're talking about people who've got some issues. So they will be assessed under the Care Act, and adult social care will then say, okay, right, these people meet criteria, and to provide them with assisted living. It's not everybody who is vulnerable that the homeless person's unit can deal with. There's some people that are too vulnerable to live in general needs housing. And so local authority homelessness services would, once they start that case, would make a referral to adult social care so that adult social care can get involved. And in partnership between housing and adult social care, they can then work with the supported living organization to provide that person with the relevant housing need and support.
Okay, can I just ask, is it possible to have your email address if I have any further questions?
Yes, Pastor Vincent and Pastor Vicky can give you all that.
Thank you.
And one other thing we did say that if people want to have access to these slides that's been presented, we can always, if you give us your email address, we can forward those slides to you so you can go through it. And if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please let us know and we will get you in touch with them. I guess it just leads us to the next.
Loretta had a contribution.
Loretta, go on, please.
No, I was just going to add to what Abim has just shared. From my perspective, we also, well, I'm aware of several organisations from the charity sector that do provide supported living, as you've just highlighted, and often the local authorities will commission such a service, and so it gives the charity organisation the opportunity to go for that in conjunction with the local authorities. So just to add that to the mix as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. Moving on swiftly, I think we've got probably 2 or 3 more questions to ask. 3 discuss, yeah. I guess, we've talked about what help the council can the local authorities will render to people who are homeless, and we've looked at it from the local authorities' perspective as well as from the charity, what the charity does to help the people. But there are mistakes that people make, which stops the council from assisting them. So people are, they've made various mistakes, and we want you to highlight on that what can you do that will prevent the council from, the local authority, from actually assisting individuals?
Thank you very much. So when people make homeless applications, there are a number of things that local authorities as a whole should do. But one of the things that is clear is that when you're approaching a local authority, if they're taking on an application to assist you, they would ask that you don't withhold information from them. And that is a part of the law where they say, look, you should not withhold information, and if your circumstances change, you've got to let them know. Now, one of the mistakes people make is simply to withhold information. They would ask, okay, have you got any medical issues? To say no. Have you got any mental health issues? To say no. And then the local authority goes through its process and they decide, we've got a duty towards you. And at some point they decide to make you an offer of accommodation on the 7th floor of a property. You then turn around and say, well, but I've got mental health issues, I cannot go up there. They look through your file and say, well, hang on a minute. We asked you several times. You said you didn't have any medical issues. But clearly, what you have done there is withheld information. If you withhold information, you're not going to get the right help. And that's one of the key mistakes that people make. They think, oh, I don't want someone to know. Or I don't want this person to know. Actually, I'm not comfortable with this person knowing my business. But if you're not comfortable with people knowing your business, then you should not be going to the local authority. But one of the things that I need to say is that local authorities do not go sharing your details about. So if you're making an application, be confident enough to provide the full facts so that they can assist you as best as they possibly can. The other is that people go out to seek advice from other people. Oh, my friend got a council flat. How did you get the council flat? And the friend will then give them some sort of a sub story. And when your friend gives you a sub story, you're acting on that when you go to the local authority. Now, the friend may not have given you the full facts, but because you're acting on the intelligence, quote unquote, that your friend has given you, you're not necessarily approaching the local authority with what it is that they need. And in some cases, it causes problems. Now, prior to the law changing in 2018, there was nothing that bound an applicant from cooperating with the local authority, although there was something that said you should not withhold information. But one of the things that still happens now is local authorities carry their assessment and they say, oh, there is what's called a personalized housing plan. You've got to work with you. So they create a plan around you to deal with your housing issues. And they say, go and look for accommodation. You choose not to. They keep looking for accommodation. They're asking you, so how many have you gone to look out for? You tell them, well, I'm not going to because I don't want private rented housing. You're not cooperating with them. They ask you to provide bank statements, and you know that you've been transferring funds between one account and the other. So you don't want to provide that. If local authority turns around and says, well, actually, we're going to discharge our duty because you're not cooperating with us, they will be acting within the law. And don't forget that homelessness is guided by law. If the local authority does something that they shouldn't do, you can judicially review their actions. You can take them to court. And that's where the law in itself gets made. Because if a local authority gets challenged, if they lose the case, the government might turn around and say, actually, we want to plug the gap there. Or it might be, or we want to plug the loophole there. Or it might be that something has happened and the government thinks, actually, this should never have happened. They make it law so that local authorities can then comply with it. It's like I mentioned earlier on, the fact that you should not be in bed and breakfast accommodation for more than 6 weeks. But there was a time when local authorities put people in bed and breakfast accommodation for more than 6 weeks. And the government decided to make it law that local authorities don't do that anymore. So it cuts both ways. The other is refusing offers of accommodation. When you refuse offers of accommodation, the local authority's hand is tied because they may then turn around and say, actually, we're discharging our duty. So if you're going to refuse an offer of accommodation, okay, the general advice would be, if you think there's something wrong with the accommodation, if it's the right size, then of course you can accept that offer and request a review. If that offer is not right for you, the local authority would look at it and would make you another offer. One is being too picky. So you say, oh, actually, I only want to live in this specific area. Local authorities are looking for accommodation for you, even if it's in the private rented sector, or if you're bidding, they're looking for accommodation for you all over the place, but all you want is to live in a specific area. The local authority is not going to be able to assist you because they've got, in the first instance, they've got limited stock. The other is that they've got a limited amount of number of landlords who work with them. And so they may not be able to assist. A fundamental thing is lying to local authorities. The person who's interviewing you may be experienced, or even if they're not experienced, they run back to their manager and say, I've got this case. The manager starts asking all sorts of questions. And saying, well, I ask this question, is what the person says. And saying, well, actually, this is not making sense. And there have been instances where people have lied to local authorities. Local authorities have accepted a duty towards them, only to find that actually that was a fraudulent application. And then the local authority turns around and takes the property back, rendering you homeless again, but not just rendering you homeless, but also in some cases taking you to court for fraud. So it's not just one issue you're dealing with, you're now dealing with fraud. And fraud, when if you don't admit to it quickly, it then goes to the Crown Courts, and that could be time in prison. So it's important that when we're going for homelessness applications, we are upfront. And in some cases, someone might say to you, look, we're not going to have a duty towards you at the end because you made yourself homeless, but you've been open and honest with me. This is what I'm going to be able to do for you. Finally, I would say using the wrong solicitors. And when I say using the wrong solicitors, imagine you are going to, you've got a medical issue, and you've got to see a hematologist. The hematologist would ordinarily deal with blood-related issues. But then you decide, well, actually, I want to talk to my hematologist because sometimes I notice that my hands are not steady. Okay, now you need to see a neurologist, but you're discussing your case with a hematologist. There's nothing the hematologist is going to be able to do for you because he's got his own specialty. The neurologist is one who's going to be able to help you with your nerve issue. In the same way, homelessness is very specific, and law on homelessness is also specialist. If you go to somebody who's just a lawyer, oh, my friend is a lawyer, he will deal with it, they could end up messing up your case. And if they do mess up that case, you're not going to get the assistance that you do need to get. In the meantime, that lawyer's got their money from legal aid, and that really is not going to help you. So I would say seek somebody who's a homelessness specialist if you're going to use a solicitor.
Wow, thank you, Abim. Again, another very, very comprehensive answer. We've been receiving comprehensive answers from Loretta and Abim tonight, which is really, really useful. And I guess to summarize that, please do your due diligence, like everything else, like you said earlier. Do your due diligence before you engage someone to work on your case. You're paying them money. There are lots of rookie people out there who are either not solicitors or not even specialist advisors in that field, and yet we take our monies to them. They lie to us. They basically make our case worse rather than better. And I think that's what Abim is really trying to point out, that we need to do our due diligence so that we don't waste our resources. I hear people pay for immigration. I hear people pay £5,000, £10,000 to people who are not even solicitors. And they tell you, oh, yeah, I've got your case in. Yeah, I've got someone in there. And they've done nothing, absolutely nothing about the case. Anyways, we're trying to tidy this up now within the next 4 or 5 minutes. And we've still got 3 questions to really, really breeze through. And that's what we're going to do. So let's move back to the acute point then. And I think this question is for Loretta. What help are available for people who are on the street? So we walk around, we see people sitting and say, any change, please? You know, can you help me, please? You know, we see all those kinds of people. What help is available to such people? I've got 3 more questions. I've got 5 minutes to tidy this up. Over to you, Loretta. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will just whiz through this. I think the question is around what help we can render, but also whether everyone that is begging is essentially a homeless person. So just to cover off the first bit with the begging, in my experience, not everyone that is seen begging on the street is homeless. But that's not to say that they have stable accommodation either. I think Abim has gone through the different categories or categories of homelessness. And so some people may be in inadequate accommodation or suffering from other issues that means that they have no other option but to be on the street begging. So I would say don't ignore them. Don't ignore anyone that you see on the street that appears to be homeless. Have a conversation. There's been often a concern around people that are begging because sometimes they're linked to organizations that are potentially exploiting them or have trafficked them into the country or trafficking them even as UK nationals because they just don't have the means to speak up for themselves. So I would say just don't discount them. Speak to anyone that you see on the street that is begging. And where you can, refer them in the first instance to the organization called StreetLink. And StreetLink is basically an outreach organization that has been set up in England and in Wales. They're the first point of contact for anyone that you see that you think is rough sleeping or likely to be rough sleeping on the street of England and Wales. And they've made it really easy for you as a member of the public to contact them either by going on their website, having the app on your phone, or by calling them. I would say if you're going to call them, you're ready for a little bit of a wait because often the lines are engaged or very busy. So if you can go online and give all the information there, is usually the best way. And they would send you back a notification so you know that they have received your information that you've alerted them to. There is a caveat to their provision in that often they'll say that they need to see the person rough sleeping, and usually their response time is around 72 hours. So I would say that if you do see somebody, as long as you've had the conversation and you've determined that they have nowhere to go, try and refer them also to a local authority. And I say that because particularly during severe weather, local authorities will just accommodate anyone that is referred to them, and they provide a 24-hour response service. So whatever time of the day, night you spot anyone rough sleeping or homeless on the street, the local authority should assess them and get them into accommodation on a night. There's also Homeless Link, and they have, if you go on the Homeless Link website, they have a list of shelters that people can be referred to directly. So just go on the Homeless Link website and get that information. Just type in hostels and you'll be able to get that information from there also. I'm going to leave that there, just covering off this one, Pastor Vincent.
Okay, thank you.
I guess, thank you, Loretta. Now to you, to Abim. How can churches and families assist those who are homeless or without the right immigration status? And I guess is that Loretta's question? Okay, maybe Loretta can answer that question, and then we'll move to Abim, and then we'll round up. So okay, shed some light on that. How can churches and families assist those without recourse to public funds?
Thanks, Pastor Vincent, Pastor Vicky. I'll say that homelessness and the root causes of homelessness can be very, very complex, and that's what I've put on the slide there. We've mentioned some of the reasons why a person might become homeless, maybe due to relationship breakdown. Sometimes there's violence associated with that. There's mental health issues, there's addiction, and what's emerging now is that we're seeing a lot of people have childhood trauma that is linked to their reason why they're becoming homeless. So it can be a very, very tricky and complex area or an issue to try and tackle. But churches can render that practical help, as I said earlier. They can be the first respondent, often where local authorities and other organizations just can't do it. But I'll say in being the first respondent or being the solution, they need to be practical, and that practical response needs to be truthful, as well as from a place of compassion and grace. So as a church, yes, you are there to make sure that you're putting your social action into that practical kind of space. Have one person or a group of people come forward to do that social action within your church. If there's anyone that has a room and someone that is experiencing homelessness, if you can come together to try and help those individuals, please do so. I would say that those organisations that provide accommodation, they're not to be frowned upon. Look to speak into them and see whether or not they can work in partnership with you to try and meet the needs of anyone that is homeless. And if you have anyone that has immigration issues, don't just turn a blind eye to them. Also link them up to organisations that can give them that advice for free. Often there won't be anyone, if you're experiencing homelessness, it's unlikely that you will get legal aid. I know Abim hasn't mentioned that, and when they make decisions, it's left to the individual to challenge that. And so if you know anyone that is experiencing homelessness, try and link them up with the organizations that will give them free advice. There's organizations that have been set up specifically just to do that render that legal support. So start small. When Jesus Christ saw the people were homeless without food, he didn't just send them home. What he did was he helped them at the points of need. And so as a church, you need to just come together, start small and build on it and meet that human need, that basic need within your communities. And that would be where I stop there, Pastor Vicky.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And final one for today, before we throw it open to any questions people may have as we round up. This is for you, Abin. So what kind of help then does councils and charities provide to those who do not have the right immigration status? What kind of help do councils provide to such people?
Thank you very much. Before I answer that question, if I may, somebody did ask a question around offers of accommodation and the length of time. To if you accept an offer of accommodation, even if you're going to request a review of that decision, it may be best to accept it, because if the review goes in your favor, you'll get something else. If it goes against you, you've still got accommodation. If you reject it and the review goes against you, you're left homeless, because you will simply be put out of temporary accommodation and you wouldn't have accommodation. So just to say the reason why it's best to sort of access at that point. Of course, it's not legal advice, it's just simply common sense advice that we tend to give people. Now, so what helps do councils and charities provide to those who are without the right immigration status? In the first instance, from the local authority viewpoint, if somebody comes to us who's got severe medical issues and they don't have the right immigration status, one of the key things we'll do is to refer to adult social care. Because as I said earlier on, under the Care Act, the adult social care team would carry out an assessment and decide if they've got a duty towards that person. Now, what they can do is ask housing to help them with accommodation, but they would then be paying for it. But by no means that is one of the instances where social service, of course, will pick up. The other is if people have got children, if you've got children and you don't have recourse to public funds, your immigration status is not right. There are times that people have the right immigration status, but they don't have recourse public funds attached to it. So they can go and come as they please, but they cannot access public funds. Again, would make a referral to children's services. And children's services would look at them and say, okay, we've got a child here who is in need. And that need may be accommodation, but the fact is that housing cannot deal with them, so we will pick them up. And that's when Loretta mentioned no recourse public funds network. That's one of the key things that no recourse public funds network do. And of course, referral to the Home Office. Now, sometimes someone's fleeing domestic violence. And in a number of cases, when you find a lady fleeing domestic violence who doesn't have immigration status, it may be that the partner's brought her into the country and then it's using the fact that I have brought you into the country, I paid your dowry and all that, to abuse the lady. If the local authority gets to know about it, particularly where there are children involved, they may make an application to the Home Office on behalf of that lady. And invariably, the Home Office have a policy where if domestic abuse is confirmed, they're likely to give you leave to remain on that basis. So that's something that local authorities can do. Then we talk about accommodation when accommodation during severe weather. Loretta mentioned sweat earlier on. When we talk about accommodation during severe weather, it's when the temperature dips below zero or when it's extremely hot. So when we have those heat waves, people aren't expected to sleep out on the streets or when the temperature dips below zero. Now, regardless of whether there is, you've got the right immigration status, the government does not want any deaths on the streets because somebody is homeless. And so local authorities are compelled to provide accommodation until the temperature rises again above 1. And of course, we talk about other help during public health emergencies. Last year when COVID struck, regardless of immigration status, the government brought in a policy, everyone in, just clear out the streets and put everyone in accommodation. And that continued until this year when everyone in ended. But during that period, a number of people who did not have the right immigration status got help to get off the streets. Some of them got sorted out by the Home Office and things were sort of moved on. And so I would say it's not necessarily, well, when it comes to that, it's not a matter of your immigration status. It's a matter simply of a public health issue that the government is dealing with. And when we talk about the others will be charities. And when we talk about charities, we're talking about the help that charities can give. We talk about immigration assistance, again, to regularize stay. We talk about domestic violence. Now, again, I mentioned domestic violence again, because in some cases, people would get involved with, say, Women's Aid, and Women's Aid would refer them to some solicitors to help them with their immigration status. Also, in some cases, to help with injunctions against the perpetrator of the violence, who can then get an exclusion from the property so that the woman can stay in the property. It's also Red Cross, for instance, help to bring people into the UK for those who were asylum seekers and have got their refugee status. Those who've got medical issues, charities would assist them with sorting out their immigration papers so they get leave to remain on humanitarian grounds. And of course, we talk about help for offenders who are deported to the UK. In this instance, there is an organization called Prisoners from Abroad who would pick up anyone who's been deported to the UK. Because even if they've got a British passport, as Loretta mentioned earlier on, they would not automatically have habitual residence. And so Prisoners from Abroad would seek to assist them, make the representations to the local authorities arguing their case. That's that. One organization that I also remember a lot is the Joint Council for Welfare of Immigrants, who put forward arguments for people who've got no recourse public funds to get their leave to remain. Social workers tend to apply also, as I mentioned earlier on, for leave to remain for people or for access to public funds where somebody's got leave to remain, and they've got leave to remain maybe because they've got children who are British citizens, but they themselves don't have, they've got leave to remain, but they don't have access to public funds. Because at some point, the government made a decision that they would give people access to look after what I would call, people I would call British slaves, look after people who are British citizens. But then you can go and come as you please. You cannot invite anyone to the UK. You cannot claim benefits. You can work, you can pay taxes into the system, but even if you lost your job, you don't be able to make a claim. Social services, because you've got children and you need access to benefits to pay for your rent and all that, social services would tend to help to apply for your access to public funds to the Home Office. And that generally is it from me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. As we can see, just so much information today shared. We did one from the start that you need to get your pen and paper and scribble down a lot of things. We hope you found that useful. Before we round up, is there any pressing question from anyone? Anything we've not addressed in the chat? Anything anyone wants to raise before we round up tonight? Anything from anyone? Either on Facebook or on Zoom? Anything anyone wants to raise? It's been really informative. Okay, so whilst we wait for that, if that happens or not, we just want to say a huge thank you. First and foremost to Abim and Loretta for the work you've done tonight. It's been really great. Thank you for all the information you've brought. And I'm sure people have found that really useful. I guess if thanks to everyone also who's made an effort to join us tonight, and hopefully you found it really useful and beneficial. And if I can just crystallize what we've learned tonight. One, there's help and assistance out there for anyone who is homeless or anyone without the right immigration status. The last thing, and I love the fact that we picked up this up right from the start, that men are less likely to seek for help than women. So please, men, let's get out there and ask for help rather than make our conditions worse. So there's help out there. If people have immigration status, there are charities who can help. There's help local authorities can provide, especially where children are involved. And local authorities won't take your details or take people's details and report them to the Home Office as people think. That doesn't happen. Local authorities have a duty to provide assistance to you. That's what they will do. If you've got an application with the Home Office already and you're having no joy on it, local authorities have fast-track schemes they can adopt, which would help ensure that a decision is made on your application as soon as possible. So let's stop this idea of burying our head in the sand or doing nothing when there's a lot of help available. But also a challenge tonight to churches and a challenge to us as Christians. We can do a lot more to help people we find in this category. The problem of the poor is the problem of the church. We are called to address the needs of the poor in society, and you don't have to do it alone. Housing justice is there. A lot of organizations are there who work closely with churches to provide the little, every little help, like Tesco will say. If we all provide the little we can, then there'll be less people sleeping on in the streets. This event has been put together by Transformation Sanctuary International. We meet every Sundays and Thursdays for our Bible study. Please feel free to join us anytime with this same Zoom link we've provided on Facebook. This video is on Facebook as on you, and it will also be on YouTube. All our previous events are on YouTube. If you just search Transformation Sanctuary Pastor Vincent on YouTube, it will bring up all our messages and all our events. We will be organizing more of such events in future, starting from the new year. We'll be focusing on families. We'll be focusing. We'll be focusing on BAME, the role of BAME, what we need to be focusing on as a people going into the future. Lots of things that we will cover and will be of benefit. So please keep an eye out for that. Please like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get. I know that sounds like I'm selling something now. I'm not just saying that. It always makes me laugh when I hear people say that. I can't believe I'm saying it myself. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click on the notification button. Bing! Just joking. So do subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook so you can know when we have similar events like this. We want to thank everyone who has taken time to join us tonight, and we pray God's blessings on you. Loretta and Abin, thank you once again. You have been fantastic, and we look forward to working with you again in the future. Thanks, everyone, and have a good evening.
And Merry Christmas to everyone in advance. We hope you have a good one.
Yes.